The game is called Hurricane Harry. The game is not reality, it is a simplified representation of reality. There will be winners and losers.
Oh no!
Hello friends! We're going to learn how to run a game called Hurricane Harry. It's a game that helps people understand disaster risk financing. How can we get money when it's needed, given that there can be shocks like hurricanes affecting regions like yours? By design, this game will take you to increasing levels of complexity, and you will experience the tolerable edge of confusion, which is where we know the best learning happens. The game Hurricane Harry represents the Caribbean region with 4 countries: St. Lucia, Grenada, Jamaica, and Belize. As a facilitator, it's good to establish the ground rules. First, why are we here? In this coming 90 minutes or so, we will share with you a designed experience that is meant for you and others to learn what can we do about disasters and their financial implications. At each table, there's a market. In the market, you see some coins that represent money. In this game, a coin is $1 million, very valuable. You also have a few tokens. Each one of these tokens represents a productive asset. If you're sitting at the head of the table, please take the lanyard and wear it. You have just become the Minister of Finance. Throughout the game, we will simplify the complexity of a nation's economy by having 4 ministries: the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, the Ministry of Tourism, and the Ministry of Emergency Management. Each one of them is associated with a color, and the assets, the tokens that correspond to each ministry, are depicted by the color. Throughout the game, there will be movement of money. Cash goes from the market to the Ministry of Finance, who can give it to one of the fellow ministers, who then spend it in the market. The goal of each minister is to ensure that there's development. Throughout this game, we are going to go through a cycle of investments, decisions, and consequences. There may be some money in the system which can be used for some assets, which can lead to some good outcomes, which can then lead to more money, which leads to a cycle of prosperity, if you make smart decisions and if you get some good luck. It could also be that something happens to your assets, or you lose your money, then you can't invest, then you can't make money, then you don't have money to invest, and then you go into a cycle of poverty, which would not be nice. The winning minister is the minister that ends the game with the most assets, with the most tokens. Ministers can confront trouble, and they can even confront a crisis. If you lose assets to the point that you find yourself with only 4 or less, guess what? That's a crisis. If that happens, you're fired. You physically stand up and leave the table. If in your country you cannot cover all the needs, that's trouble as well. Players have to do anything they can to cover the needs of the population. In this game, the Minister of Tourism and the Minister of Infrastructure and Transport are the 2 ministers that start off with better initial conditions. They start with more assets, with more tokens. They start with 8 tokens. Also, if you look at the board, there's 1 circle per month from January to December. And those represent months where certain things have to be done, certain needs have to be covered. For the 2 richest ministries, January all the way to August are months where the needs are covered. Whereas for the 2 poorer ministries, Emergency Management and Food and Agriculture, not enough tokens, only 7 instead of 8, and also fewer months covered. You'll see that the colored circles go from January to July, not to August. Now, each of these productive assets may give you good results or not, depending on the season. For example, for agriculture, maybe the rains are not so good. Or for tourism, maybe the exchange rate is not favorable and people just don't come to your country. We will represent the variability across seasons by having each player take all their assets, put them in their hands. We're going to take it and shake it well, and then close to the table, let it fall until you see either showing the color of your ministry or white. So let's imagine you're the Minister of Transport and you shook and you got a total of 4 of your assets showing the color. Well, the first thing you do is you take one of the colored assets and you move it to cover the first circle with the month that shows the word need. In this case, the month of September needs to be covered. After you've done that, you take the next token and cover the next month, October, if you have another colored token showing. And then on with the next one and the next one until you have covered all months. Has anybody covered exactly until December? If so, please wave your hands. 1, 2 players, 3 and 4. Very cool. So this is a typical result. Many ministries, most years, can cover needs. That's a year where you didn't have any surplus, you didn't have any deficit, no problem. Maybe some of the players in their shaking and rolling, they didn't get as many colors showing to cover the entire year, and maybe it shows only covering until November. If you cannot cover all the months, but you can cover almost all of the months, as a minister you have some flexibility. For example, you could not do all the maintenance you should. Maybe you don't renew one of those contracts. Maybe you cut a few corners here and there. As long as you have up to the month of November covered, we can assume that it's okay to stretch your budget and you're fine for the year. Maybe you have a surplus. You as facilitator will ask them to let everyone know by saying loud and clear, surplus! And then you as facilitator can hear what is happening in the room and you can know who is doing well and who isn't. When a player got a surplus, doesn't matter if it was only 1 token in excess of the needs or if it was 2 or more. When there's a surplus, that player can go into the market and take one of the tokens of your color. Exactly. That is yours, and you take that plus all the other ones in your hand, and as you move to the next year, now you have more assets, you're more likely to do well next year. Congratulations, sir, you're off to a good start. If a player cannot cover all the circles in need, that's trouble. In such circumstance, the player has to stand up and shout, "Oh no!" Has to stay standing until a way is figured out to cover all those needs. How can that be done? Well, one option is to get money from the Ministry of Finance or from some other donor. So you could ask for money. Guess what? In this first round, no one has money. Poor Minister of Finance has no cash. If you have needs to cover and you couldn't cover them all, your only choice is to take one of your assets that didn't do well and sell it. Put it in the market, and in exchange you get just enough money to cover any remaining need. Doesn't matter if you had 1 remaining need uncovered or 3 or 4, sell one and it takes care of the problem. What this means is that now you can sit down and be ready for the next round, but you have fewer assets to shake and roll and try to do well next year. For the second year, we're going to teach taxation. There are some coins in the market. The Minister of Finance can tax the market by taking 2 of those coins. That has become the Minister of Finance ownership. Those coins can be used to give to other ministers on the same country to cover some need, or they could be kept for future years. Other ministers may scream what they need, doesn't matter, it's the Minister of Finance who decides. Minister of Finance may find a situation where there's more need for cash than the cash available. Then maybe someone will not get as much cash as needed. the minister does what the minister wants and can, and has to explain to the cabinet why the decision that was made that way. Moving on to the next year, we're going to learn that there are ways to get money from outside of the country. One option is to get a loan. We're going to introduce FinLoans Inc. Note that the logo looks a bit like a fin of a shark. This is an expensive loan. So you get 5 now, you end up repaying 10. Is this a good deal? It's not a very good deal. But if you need the money and that's your only choice, maybe Minister of Finance will have to go into that bad deal. If you want to borrow this money, Minister of Finance, you need to sign, you have to write your name, and you have to take it to the financial entity to get the coins and then repay. There is also something we haven't spoken about yet in the game, which is hurricanes. They can be category 1, very small, category 5, very big, or anywhere in between. As facilitator, you play the role of nature. You choose where the hurricane starts. You place it in one of the hexagons. I advise you do it somewhere far away from the other countries. And then there's a deck of cards that determines what will happen. The default is that the hurricane is moving along the typical trajectory from east to west until it turns or it grows. In the deck of cards, there are 8 cards. The most frequent card is the card that says go. Hurricane keeps moving in the direction it was moving. There are 5 of these. But sometimes, instead of going, maybe it will grow. It would move there but become one category bigger. Or it could turn. If it turns, it changes 60 degrees roughly along the hexagonal grid, and that's the new direction of movement. If the next time you get a go, it keeps going in that diagonal. If a small hurricane makes landfall, category 1, category 2, it makes small damage. What does small damage mean? It means that each minister that has assets takes one of the assets and puts it on this board where it says mild damage. That means that that asset is temporarily not going to work. You put it aside, you shake all the other ones, and the next year you recover the asset. If you were hit by a category 2, then each ministry has 2 assets affected. Now, if a category 3 or bigger happens, not only it causes some mild damage, which would mean that next year you recover, but it also causes some serious damage. So in this case, or you should have one here and one there. What that means is that this one will go back to you. Congratulations, next year. This one stays there until you spend $1 million to fix it. That's money. That's money that chances are your Minister of Finance doesn't have. Minister of Finance, how many coins do you have now? Just one. There would be 4 here. And remember that you are shaking less, so you're likely to be confronting more deficit than usual. A category 5 would cause 1 mild damage and 2 serious damage. Moving on to the next year, when we're going to learn what is the most important part of this game, what are the instruments for disaster risk financing? One of the things you can get is an insurance contract. The insurance contract is simple. If you pay 1 coin upfront as a premium, if you don't get hit by a hurricane category 3 or higher, the insurance company keeps the coin. And then if a hurricane category 3 or bigger hits your country, then you get a payout of 8. The end of the year arrives, guess what? Start again. You also have another option, which is a contingency loan. In the contingency loan, instead of borrowing money from the FinLoans Inc., you can have a pre-established agreement that allows you more favorable conditions to borrow right after the shock and to repay later with certain pre-agreed conditions. So you shall receive these pieces of paper. And you have to write how much money you would like to receive. Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 2? And you have to describe in case of the occurrence of what? Is it a hurricane of a certain magnitude? Is it something else that is measurable? You have to describe it here. You have to describe the event in a way that someone else, not you, can read the text, look at the real world and say, yes, this happened, I verify it's true, or no, it didn't. You cannot write here, if the minister is in trouble, because that will be a little bit too flexible. If this condition manifests, then this amount of money goes to the Minister of Finance, and then you have to write how the repayment schedule would happen. And if this is what you want, you have to bring it to the facilitator, signed with your name and with legible text before the end of the countdown. As facilitator, you will say you can get insurance, you can get contingency loan, or you may choose nothing. Before the countdown, you have to bring the paper, if needed, the payment, the coin for insurance, 7 minutes. Have a conversation at your table. Do you want one, the other, or none? Make your decision before the countdown. Good luck. Talk to each other about the difficult, complex relationships that determine what to go for and what to stay away from. And then we move on to what will become the last round. We're going to introduce an additional option for insurance. Remember, the first insurance contract was you pay 1 upfront, and if a category 3 or bigger hits, you get 8. Well, this other insurance contract has a similar structure but different numbers. You pay 2 upfront. If a category 2 or bigger happens, you get a payout of 10. And with that, you can better deal with the financial consequences of the disaster. Another option is for all 3 countries or the entire Caribbean region to create a reserve fund. Someone from each country has to put down 1 coin that buys you access to the reserve fund. The donor will match you with either 1 or 2 coins per coin that you put in. So you basically multiply the value of your money. And that reserve fund stays in a pot unless something happens that you have to agree. You could say, if this happens in one of the countries, the money goes there. Another option is partial reappropriation. If your country pays 1 upfront, that allows for changing the legislation, establishing the financial mechanisms, and so on, so that in the future, any surplus can become, a surplus of one minister can become an asset for someone else, or you can actually trade assets. An additional option is the CAT-DDO. This is a very interesting instrument that the World Bank is making available to multiple countries. It's a catastrophe deferred drawdown option. What is a CAT-DDO? It's a financial instrument that allows a Minister of Finance to draw down up to 6 coins, $6 million, if a disaster happens and the national emergency is declared. And then the subsequent 3 years, you don't have to pay anything back yet until you get back on your feet. And then starting the 4th year, you start repaying 1 coin per year until you have repaid the capital. You don't need to pay interest in this game. The donor takes care of that extra expense. So as facilitator, you will invite people to read the documents that explain each financial instrument, give them about 15 minutes to explore which one is beneficial, what they can do, what not to do. No more than 2 instruments per table, otherwise it becomes too complicated. And like before, there's a hard deadline. You count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop, and either they brought the signed legible document or they didn't. We have learned how the game works. You have learned how to facilitate it. Please, as facilitator, start with a captive audience that is safe. You will experience your own voice, your own rhythms. You will figure out how to improve. And then, as you get better, you move on to practicing and delivering facilitation with different senior people that matter. Thank you for your attention, wishing you all the best with what follows, and thank you, World Bank team, for making this possible.